The casino never sleeps in Monte Carlo. The champagne flows, the roulette wheels spin, and fortunes are won and lost before the clock strikes midnight. But on this particular night, someone lost more than money. A man was found dead, stabbed, in a room full of people, and yet, impossibly, nobody saw a thing. Every suspect had an alibi. Every alibi was perfect. And perfect, as the great Hercule Poirot once said, is the first sign that something is very, very wrong. Welcome, dear listeners, to the Midnight Alibi of Monte Carlo, a Hercule Poirot mystery where greed wears a dinner jacket, lies sparkle like diamonds, and the most dangerous weapon in the room is a smile. If you enjoy classic mysteries told the old way, slow, sharp, and satisfying, then hit that subscribe button, leave a comment below, and let's begin. Monsieur Poirot is waiting. The glittering cage. The Mediterranean in September is a thing of cruel beauty. The sea lies flat and dark beyond the promenade, catching the lights of Monte Carlo like a mirror that has grown tired of honest reflections. The palm trees stand perfectly still, no breeze, no movement, as though even the air itself has been paid to behave. And above it all, perched on its rocky hill, like a jewelled crown, upon a very old skull, sits the Casino de Monte Carlo, blazing with light at 10:30 on a Tuesday evening. Inside, the world was exactly as it always was. That is to say, artificial in every possible way, and yet somehow more real than anything outside it. The chandeliers dripped crystal, the carpets swallowed sound. Men in evening dress move between the tables with the careful, unhurried steps of people who have learned that urgency is considered rather vulgar in expensive places. Women in silk and pearls laughed at precisely the right moments. The croupiers called their numbers in voices trained to reveal nothing. No excitement, no boredom, no opinion whatsoever. It was, Hercule Poirot thought, a very fine performance, all of it. He stood just inside the entrance to the main salon, holding a small glass of mineral water. He had never understood the glamour of alcohol, not truly, and he observed. This was, after all, what Poirot did best. Not the running about, not the dramatic confrontations in dark alleyways. He observed, and he thought, and he allowed his little grey cells to do the work that Scotland Yard and the Sûreté combined could rarely manage. He was here, technically, on holiday. Captain Hastings had insisted upon it. Poirot, old boy, you haven't rested in 4 months. Doctor's orders, and mine as well. Monte Carlo, 2 weeks, no cases, no murders, no bodies. Poirot had agreed. He had packed his trunk with considerable care, selected 3 of his finest suits, ensured his moustaches were in impeccable condition, and boarded the train south with every intention of doing absolutely nothing of importance. That had been 6 days ago. He was already rather bored. Hastings appeared at his elbow now, slightly flushed, his evening jacket not quite as crisp as it had been an hour before. He had been at the baccarat table. Poirot could tell by the particular quality of his cheerfulness, the forced variety, which meant he had lost. Magnificent place, what? Hastings said, gazing around the salon with genuine admiration. Hastings always had genuine admiration for things. It was, Poirot reflected, both his greatest charm and his most consistent professional liability. It is very shiny, Poirot agreed pleasantly. Shiny? Is that all you can say? Look at it, Poirot. The lights, the people. That woman over there in the red dress, good Lord. Hastings. Yes, sorry. But you must admit it has a certain atmosphere, Poirot supplied. Yes, the atmosphere of a place where everyone is pretending to be someone slightly more fortunate than they actually are. It is not uncomfortable, but it is not real. Hastings gave him the look he reserved for moments when he suspected Poirot was being deliberately difficult. You know, some people simply enjoy themselves on holiday. And I am enjoying myself enormously, Poirot said, yet without moving his eyes from the room. I am watching. It was at precisely this moment that Poirot first saw Victor Hargrove. He was not a man one could easily miss. Not because he was handsome. He was not particularly. He was perhaps 60, broad across the shoulders, with a heavy jaw and the kind of permanent sunburn that speaks of years spent on the decks of expensive boats rather than honest outdoor labour. His hair was silver and thick, swept back from a wide forehead. He wore his evening clothes well, in the manner of a man who has worn them so long they have become a second skin rather than a costume. But it was not his appearance that drew the eye. It was the way the room arranged itself around him. People moved subtly, without seeming to. Waiters appeared before he could raise a hand. The croupier at the nearest table straightened fractionally when Hargrove passed. A woman, blonde, somewhere in her late 30s, wearing rather more jewellery than was strictly necessary, turned her head to watch him cross the room, and then turned it back with the practiced speed of someone who did not wish to be observed watching. "Who is that man?" Poirot asked quietly. Hastings followed his gaze. "Oh, that's Hargrove, Victor Hargrove. You haven't heard of him? He's been in all the papers, made an absolute fortune in... Actually, I'm not entirely sure what he made it in. Shipping, I think. Or was it steel? Something very large and very profitable." He paused. "Word is he's worth somewhere in the region of £4 million. Perhaps more." "And the people around him?" Hastings scanned the room with rather more enthusiasm than skill. "Well, the woman in the green is his wife, Celestine Hargrove. French, I believe, or perhaps Belgian. Married him 8 years ago. They say she was a singer before, not opera, the other kind." He lowered his voice in the way Englishmen do when they consider something slightly scandalous. "The younger man beside him, that's Geoffrey Marsh, his nephew, stands to inherit a good portion of the estate, from what I understand. Then there's Dr. Alastair Fenn, the tall one with the spectacles, Hargrove's personal physician. Follows him everywhere, apparently. Heart condition, they say." "Hargrove has a heart condition?" "So it's rumoured. Fenn never leaves his side when they travel." Poirot's eyes moved across the gathering with the quiet efficiency of a man cataloguing an exhibition. "And the others in that particular orbit?" "The woman in blue, the serious-looking one, that's Miss Iris Leland, Hargrove's private secretary. Terribly efficient by all accounts. Been with him 12 years. Hastings thought for a moment. "And the fellow by the window, the one who looks as though he'd rather be somewhere else entirely, that's Philippe Renard, a Frenchman. Some sort of business associate, I gather. There was a rumour of a dispute between them. Money, naturally. There's always money." "There is always money," Poirot agreed softly, almost to himself. He was still watching Hargrove, who had now settled at one of the chemin de fer tables with the ease of a man who considers such places his natural habitat. "Tell me, Hastings, who told you all of this?" Hastings blinked. "The concierge at the hotel, mostly. And the fellow at the bar earlier. Charming chap, very talkative." "Why?" "Because," Poirot said, turning away from the scene at last and taking a precise sip of his mineral water, "in a casino, everyone talks. And when everyone talks, it is usually because someone very much wants certain things to be known." Hastings stared at him. "You don't think..." "I think nothing, yet." Poirot set his glass down on the tray of a passing waiter with a small courteous nod. "I observe. Come, mon ami, let us take a turn about the room. The evening is young, and I find myself, despite my holiday, professionally curious." They moved through the salon slowly, as guests do, pausing here and there. Poirot said little, which was deceptive, because he missed nothing. He noted the way Geoffrey Marsh watched his uncle, with an expression that had been carefully assembled into one of affection, but which contained underneath something with considerably sharper edges. He noted the way Miss Iris Leland carried a small leather notebook and occasionally made entries in it with a pen she kept in her left hand. Not her right, which was interesting in a minor way that Poirot filed away without yet knowing why. He noted that Dr. Fenn checked his wristwatch with a regularity that suggested either anxiety or habit, and that Philippe Renard drank steadily and spoke to no one. And he noted that Celestine Hargrove, the wife, smiled beautifully at her husband across the table, and that her eyes, when he looked away, were completely and utterly empty. It was, Poirot thought, a very interesting collection of people. He hoped, for all their sakes, that nothing would happen to any of them. The clock on the wall of the Casino de Monte Carlo read 11:47, 13 minutes to midnight. The stroke of midnight. The chemin de fer table where Victor Hargrove sat was the most expensive in the room. This was not a matter of official designation. The Casino de Monte Carlo did not advertise such things, but everyone in the salon understood it instinctively. The way one understands the hierarchy of seating at a formal dinner without anyone explaining the rules. The chips were larger here. The silences between plays were longer. The croupier was older, steadier, with the particular stillness of a man who has seen fortunes made and destroyed across green bays and has arrived at a condition of perfect indifference to both outcomes. Hargrove played well. Poirot could see that from across the room. Not brilliantly. Brilliance at cards is often a young man's quality, fueled by instinct and appetite. Hargrove played with the measured confidence of experience. He knew when to press and when to withdraw. He lost 2 hands in succession without the slightest alteration in his expression, which told Poirot rather more about the man than the playing itself. Money to Victor Hargrove was not something one worried about losing. It was simply material, like stone to a sculptor. The thing that mattered was what you built with it, and what you kept others from building. "He's rather good, isn't he?" Hastings murmured beside him. "He is controlled," Poirot corrected gently, "which is not always the same thing. But yes, he is a man who understands the value of appearing untroubled." "You make that sound like a criticism." "I make it sound like an observation. The criticism, if there is one, belongs to the situation, not the man." Not yet." Hastings gave a small sigh of the variety that meant he had stopped trying to follow Poirot's reasoning and was simply waiting for events to prove him right or wrong. The clock moved on. At 11:55, Victor Hargrove rose from the table. He did it without drama, pushed back his chair, exchanged a word with the croupier, accepted the small respectful nod that wealthy men receive in such establishments as their natural due, and then moved away from the table with the unhurried step of a man with a destination in mind. Not the main floor, not the bar where Renard still stood with his glass. He moved toward the corridor at the far eastern end of the salon, the one that led, Poirot happened to know from a previous evening's exploration, to the private card rooms reserved for members and their guests. Poirot watched him go. He noticed as Hargrove crossed the room 3 things in quick succession. Geoffrey Marsh, the nephew, glanced up from his own table. He had been playing roulette with the concentrated frown of a man losing more than he could comfortably afford, and tracked his uncle's progress across the room with an attention that he attempted, not quite successfully, to disguise as indifference. Miss Iris Leland, who had been standing near the east wall making notes in her leather book, closed the notebook and slipped it into her evening bag precisely as Hargrove passed her. They did not speak. They did not exchange a glance, and yet something passed between them. Some small invisible signal of the kind that exists only between people who have worked in close proximity for many years. And Dr. Alastair Fenn, Ian, who had been sitting in a chair near the entrance with a cup of coffee and an expression of mild medical vigilance, stood up. He did not follow immediately. He waited perhaps 40 seconds, Poirot counted, and then walked in the same direction, at a pace designed to appear casual. "Poirot," Hastings said quietly. "Something wrong?" "I am not certain," Poirot said, which was partially true. "Perhaps nothing. Perhaps—" The clock struck midnight. 12 clear, resonant strokes, rolling through the casino from the great old clock above the entrance. The sound moved across the salon like a slow wave, and for just a moment, one of those peculiar moments that seem to exist slightly outside of time, the room was quiet. Cards paused in mid-deal. Conversation dipped. Even the roulette wheel seemed to hold its breath between one spin and the next. Then from the eastern corridor, a woman screamed. It was not a theatrical scream, not the kind one hears in bad plays high and performed. It was short, sharp, and immediately cut off, as though the person producing it had clapped a hand over their own mouth from shock. It was, in Poirot's considerable experience, the sound of someone who had opened a door and found something that the mind refused, for one terrible instant, to accept. The salon moved, not in a coordinated way, people do not coordinate well under sudden shock, but in the instinctive, disorganized surge of a crowd that has heard something it cannot immediately explain. Waiters appeared from nowhere. A woman at the baccarat table stood up too quickly and knocked her champagne glass sideways, when two men near the bar moved toward the corridor with the automatic authority of people accustomed to being useful in emergencies. Poirot moved differently. He moved quickly, yes, but with direction. While others converged on the corridor in a general mass of alarm, he was already through the entrance and in the passageway, his eyes adjusting to the slightly dimmer light, his mind already engaged. The corridor was perhaps 30 feet long, lined with dark wood panelling and 3 doors on the left side. The first 2 were closed, the third, at the far end, stood open. In the doorway stood Celestine Hargrove. She was pressed against the doorframe, with both hands at her sides, fingers spread flat against the wood, as though she needed its solidity to remain upright. Her face, carefully beautiful, carefully arranged all evening, had collapsed into something raw and more honest. She was not crying. She was simply staring into the room beyond, with the fixed, glassy attention of someone whose mind has gone very quiet. Poirot reached her in seconds. He touched her arm gently. "Madame, s'il vous plaît," and she stepped aside without resistance, without seeming to fully register his presence. He looked into the room. It was a private card room, small, well-appointed, a single table at the centre, 4 chairs, a sideboard with decanters, a single lamp burning warm and low in the corner. The kind of room designed for gentlemen who wish to play cards away from the public gaze. Quiet, private, discreet. Victor Hargrove was in one of the chairs. He sat as a man sits who has decided to rest, leaning back slightly, hands in his lap, body head tilted just a degree to the left. From the doorway, in the warm amber of the single lamp, one might have thought him sleeping. Except for the handle of the knife, it protruded from the left side of his chest with the neat, terrible precision of something that had been placed rather than thrown. The blade buried deep, the handle a plain, dark wood, unremarkable and somehow worse for it. There was blood on his shirt front, not a great deal, which Poirot noted with the careful, unhappy attention of a man who has seen enough of such things to read their evidence. A wound that bleeds inward, a wound delivered with knowledge of where to aim. Hargrove's eyes were open. They held the expression that Poirot had seen before, on other faces, in other rooms, the absolute, so final blankness of a man who had been alive one moment and was not the next, with no interval of understanding between the two. Poirot stood very still for 3 seconds. Behind him, he could hear Hastings arriving in the corridor, and the voices of others gathering at the entrance to the passageway. He heard someone, a man authoritative, calling for the police. He heard Celestine Hargrove begin, at last, to cry, in the quiet, methodical way of someone who has been holding it back through sheer force of will. He did not turn around. He remained in the doorway, his eyes moving across the room with the slow, systematic thoroughness of a man reading a page of very small print. The chairs, all 4, though only one occupied. The sideboard had 1 decanter open, 1 glass used, 1 glass untouched. The window, closed, all latched from the inside, he could see from here. The floor, carpeted, no visible disturbance. The table surface, clean baize, no cards laid out. Hargrove had not come here to play. He had come here to meet someone. Poirot turned finally. The corridor was filling now. Casino staff, 2 or 3 guests who had pushed forward from curiosity or concern, and Hastings, who had gone the particular colour he went at scenes of violence, which was a sort of determined pale. "Is he?" Hastings began. "Yes," Poirot said quietly. "He is dead. The blow was precise, Hastings, not frantic, not desperate, deliberate." He paused, looking back at the room once more. Someone in this building tonight knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it in 4 minutes, between 11:56 when Hargrove left the salon and midnight when the scream was heard. 4 minutes, Hastings repeated. Good Lord. In 4 minutes, Poirot said, almost to himself, a man was murdered, and in those same 4 minutes, if I am not very much mistaken. He turned to look back down the corridor toward the salon, where the faces of Geoffrey Marsh, Dr. Fenn, Miss Leland, and Philippa Renard could all be glimpsed in the gathering crowd. Every single person who might have wished him dead was somewhere else entirely. He straightened his already straight jacket. His expression was grave, and beneath the gravity there was something else, the particular quality of absolute, focused attention that Hastings had learned over many years to recognize and quietly dread. The police will come, Poirot said, and they will do what the police do. They will look for the person without an alibi. But I think, mon ami, that this murderer is far more intelligent than that. A small pause. This is a crime built on alibis. It is a crime designed to be unsolvable. He looked once more at the still figure of Victor Hargrove, sitting in his expensive chair in his expensive room, with the knife handle dark against his white shirt front. We shall see about that, Poirot said softly. We shall see. The little grey cells awaken. The Monte Carlo police arrived at 12 minutes past midnight. Poirot knew this precisely because he checked his watch. A small rectangular thing in a gold case that had belonged to his father and kept better time than most people managed to keep their promises. At the moment, the first uniformed officer stepped through the casino's entrance and looked around with the particular expression of a man who has been pulled from a warm bed and is not yet reconciled to the fact. The officer in charge was an Inspector Marceau, short, dark-moustached in the southern French manner, which is to say considerably less impressively than Poirot's own, though Poirot was too courteous to make this observation aloud. Marceau moved through the casino with professional efficiency, establishing a perimeter around the eastern corridor, taking initial statements from the staff and regarding Poirot himself with a mixture of reluctant respect and mild resentment that French policemen of a certain seniority tended to produce when confronted with the Belgian detective's reputation. Monsieur Poirot, he said, when they had been formally introduced by the casino's flustered manager. I have heard of you, naturally. Naturally, Poirot agreed, without vanity. It was simply true. You were present this evening. I am on holiday. Marceau looked at him with the expression of a man deciding whether this statement was intended humorously. You discovered the body. I was among the first to reach it. Madame Hargrove was in the doorway. I did not enter the room. I examined from the threshold only. I was careful not to disturb anything. Good. Marceau nodded, made a note, and then, with the air of a man who has made a calculation and arrived at the only sensible conclusion, said, I would be grateful, Monsieur Poirot, for any observations you care to share. Unofficially, you understand. Unofficially, Poirot agreed pleasantly. Of course. This arrangement suited everyone. Marceau retained authority, Poirot retained access, and Hastings, who had recovered his colour somewhat and was standing nearby with his notebook. He always produced a notebook at crime scenes, though his notes were, in Poirot's private opinion, charmingly useless, felt that the investigation had officially begun. The casino had been quietly, firmly closed. The guests, those who had not already slipped away in the confusion, which told its own small story, were gathered in the main salon and asked to remain. Staff had been separated from guests with the practiced efficiency of an establishment that, while unaccustomed to murder, was extremely accustomed to managing difficult situations discreetly, and so it was that at approximately midnight, Hercule Poirot sat down in a small office off the main corridor, borrowed from the casino's assistant manager, who had produced it with trembling helpfulness and began, in his methodical way, to think. Hastings sat across from him. Between them on the desk was a sheet of paper, on which Poirot had written, in his small precise hand, 5 names. Celestine Hargrove, wife. Geoffrey Marsh, nephew. Dr. Alistair Fenn, personal physician. Miss Iris Leland, private secretary. Ou Philippe Renard, business associate. He looked at the list, then he looked at it again. 5 suspects, Hastings said, with the slightly eager quality he brought to the beginnings of investigations. 5 people in Hargrove's immediate circle who are present tonight, Poirot corrected gently. Whether they are suspects remains to be established. One does not begin by assuming guilt, Hastings. One begins by assuming nothing, and then allows the facts to do the assuming for you. Right, yes, quite. Hastings looked at the list. Well, where do we start? Poirot was quiet for a moment. This was the stage he liked. Not the dramatic revelation at the end, which the public found satisfying, but this, the quiet beginning, when the shape of a crime was still forming itself in his mind, like a photograph developing in a dark room, and the details arriving slowly, the picture emerging, the meaning of it all, still hidden but present, somewhere beneath the surface of things. We start, he said, with what we know, the facts as they stand. Hargrove left the main salon at 11:56. He entered the private card room at the end of the eastern corridor. He was found dead at midnight, 4 minutes later at most. The window of that room was latched from inside. There is only one entrance, the door through which Madame Hargrove discovered him. So whoever killed him came through that door, or was already in the room when he arrived. Yes, Poirot nodded slowly. The door was not locked. Anyone with knowledge of the casino's layout could have entered that room before Hargrove, waited, and he made a small, imprecise gesture that completed the sentence without requiring words. Cold-blooded, Hastings said. Extremely. But here is what troubles me most, Hastings. Not the method, the timing. He tapped the sheet of paper. 4 minutes. In 4 minutes, a man was killed. The killer left the room, returned to the salon, and re-established themselves among the general company, all before the scream drew attention to the corridor. Hastings frowned. It's tight. It is very tight. It requires either extraordinary luck or extraordinary planning, and I do not believe in extraordinary luck in cases of this nature. He paused. Which means this was planned. Carefully, precisely, and in advance. The killer knew Hargrove would come to that room at that time. Which means Hargrove was meeting someone. Yes, he was lured, or he arranged to meet someone in that room. The meeting was the trap. Hastings was quiet for a moment, working through it. But then, the killer came through the corridor. Someone would have seen them. Would they? Think, Hastings. At 11:55, the salon was full. People at their tables at the bar, in conversation. The corridor is 30 feet long, with a turning at the end. A person moving with purpose and reasonable speed, going and returning within 4 minutes, need only avoid being specifically observed. Not invisible, simply unremarkable. Still risky? Yes, but risk when one has no alternative becomes acceptable. Poirot looked at the list again. Now, let us consider each of them in turn. He began with Geoffrey Marsh. The nephew had been found, when the initial confusion settled, at the roulette table where he had spent most of the evening. 3 separate witnesses, 2 other players and a croupier confirmed that he had been at that table continuously from 11:30 until the scream at midnight. He had, in fact, been in a minor dispute with the croupier at approximately 11:58 over a disputed chip, which had drawn brief attention from those nearby. A public argument at the precise moment of the murder, Hastings observed. Convenient. Very, Poirot agreed. But he wrote Geoffrey Marsh's name on a separate sheet and underlined it once, which was his system for persons of interest, and moved on. Dr. Fenn had been seen leaving the salon at approximately 11:56, the same moment as Hargrove. But 2 waiters confirmed that he had stopped in the corridor outside the main entrance to the salon. Not the eastern corridor, to speak with a member of the casino's medical staff about, of all things, the location of the establishment's first aid room. The conversation had lasted, the staff member confirmed, several minutes. He was nowhere near the eastern corridor, Hastings said. So it appears Miss Iris Leland had not left the main salon at all, according to 4 separate witnesses, including the casino's head of security, who had happened to be making his routine floor inspection at the relevant time. Philippe Renard had been at the bar throughout, in conversation with the barman. a conversation that the barman, when questioned, recalled clearly because Renard had been discussing, at some length and with considerable emotion, the unfairness of a particular business arrangement which the barman had found both tedious and impossible to escape. And Celestine Hargrove, who had found the body, had, according to the croupier at the nearest table, risen from her seat at approximately 11:58 and walked toward the eastern corridor. 2 minutes, Hastings said sharply. If she entered at 11:58 and the scream came at midnight, she had 2 minutes, Poirot said. Yes, he looked at Celestine Hargrove's name on the list. Or she arrived at the door, found her husband already dead, stood frozen in shock for perhaps 90 seconds, and then screamed. Or she killed him and stood frozen in a different kind of shock. Both are possible. Both must be considered. He sat back in his chair and pressed his fingertips together in the attitude that Hastings privately thought of as the thinking position, the one that meant Poirot had stopped speaking to the room and started speaking to himself, internally, in some private language of logic and deduction that produced results Hastings could rarely follow until they were explained to him afterward. The silence lasted perhaps 2 minutes. Then Poirot said, "The knife. What about it? Plain handle, dark wood, not a casino knife, not from the kitchens or the bar, or it would have been recognised immediately by the staff. Brought in, which means the murderer carried it into the casino tonight. Which means..." He opened his eyes and looked at Hastings with an expression of mild dissatisfaction, as though the conclusion annoyed him slightly. This murder was not a decision made in the heat of this evening. It was brought here, in a pocket, in a bag, in a case, premeditated to the last detail. Someone planned to kill him tonight specifically. Someone planned to kill him tonight, in that room, at that time, and to be elsewhere, visibly, confirmably elsewhere, when it happened. Poirot frowned. Which presents us, Hastings, with a problem of some elegance. Elegance? Yes, because if every suspect has an alibi, and the alibi of each one is confirmed by independent witnesses, staff, other guests, persons with no connection to the crime, then either we have missed something or, he paused, or someone in that salon tonight was not what they appeared to be. Hastings stared at him. You mean one of the witnesses is lying? I mean, Poirot said carefully, that a perfect crime requires a perfect mechanism, and a perfect mechanism has many parts. Not all of them are the killer. He looked at the list one final time. Then he put his pen down, stood, straightened his jacket with the automatic precision of a man who straightens his jacket before entering any situation of difficulty, and said, "Come, Hastings, it is time to speak with them. One by one, if you please. Beginning with..." He hesitated, and here Hastings noticed something he had seen only rarely in all his years with Poirot. A small hesitation, a fractional uncertainty. Poirot's eyes moved between two names on the list, Geoffrey Marsh and Celestine Hargrove, and for just a moment, some private calculation ran behind his expression, arrived at a conclusion. And then, "Beginning with Dr. Fenn," Poirot said. Hastings blinked. "Fenn, not the wife. The wife is too obvious a beginning, and the obvious, Hastings, in my experience, is precisely where the clever murderer most wishes us to look." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame, and added, almost as an afterthought, "Also, I wish to ask him about the heart condition." "Hargrove's?" "Yes," a small pause. "Or perhaps the lack of it." And he was gone into the corridor before Hastings could ask what exactly he meant by that. Hastings picked up his notebook, looked at his own notes, which read, in their entirety, "Suspects. Alibis all good. Knife brought in. Wife, 2 minutes. Ask Poirot about heart," and followed him out. A web of perfect alibis. Dr. Alistair Fenn was a tall man who carried his height apologetically. This was Poirot's first clear impression when Fenn was brought into the small office. He folded himself into the chair across the desk, with the habitual care of someone who has spent a lifetime being slightly too large for the spaces available to him. His evening jacket was well cut, but had seen better seasons. His spectacles, wire-rimmed, slightly smudged on the left lens, which Poirot noted, sat low on a long nose, above a mouth that was, at this moment, arranged into an expression of professional composure that did not quite reach his eyes. His eyes were tired, not the tiredness of a late evening, the deeper kind. "Dr. Fenn," Poirot began pleasantly, settling into his own chair with the air of a man who has all the time in the world and intends to use every minute of it. "Thank you for your patience. I appreciate that this has been a most distressing evening." "It has," Fenn said. His voice was measured, precise, the voice of a man trained to deliver difficult information, calmly. "Victor was my patient, and I had believed my friend." "Had believed," Poirot repeated gently. "An interesting phrasing." Fenn looked at him steadily. "A slip of the tongue. He was my friend." "Of course." Poirot smiled and moved on with the smooth efficiency of a man who has noted something and chosen, for now, to leave it where it lies. "You were his personal physician for how long?" 7 years. "And you travelled with him regularly, when his health required it?" Victor had a cardiac condition. Not severe, but requiring monitoring. He was not a man who moderated his habits voluntarily, which made consistent medical supervision necessary. Fenn's mouth tightened fractionally. He found moderation, in any form, rather beneath him. "I see. And this evening? Were you monitoring him this evening?" "As much as one can in a casino, yes. I kept him in sight for most of the evening. He was agitated, I thought. More than usual." Poirot leaned forward very slightly. "Agitated? In what manner?" Fenn considered. Victor was not a nervous man. He did not fidget, did not show anxiety in the ordinary ways. But I have known him 7 years, and I know his body's responses to stress as well as I know my own. His colour was high, his movements were contained. The way he moves when something is pressing on his mind. A pause. He drank less than usual, which with Victor was always a sign that he was thinking hard about something. "Did he speak to you about what was troubling him?" "No. Victor did not discuss his troubles with me. Our relationship was professional, whatever other word one might apply to it." "And yet you followed him when he left the salon?" There was a silence. Not a long one, perhaps 3 seconds, but in Poirot's experience, 3 seconds of unexpected silence from an intelligent person contains a considerable amount of information. "I walked in that direction, yes," Fenn said carefully. "I intended to check on him. As I said, he seemed agitated and with his cardiac history. But you did not reach him." "I was stopped in the outer corridor. A member of the casino's medical staff, they maintain a small first aid room near the entrance, recognised me, apparently. He wished to consult me about a guest who had felt unwell earlier in the evening. A minor matter. It delayed me perhaps 5 minutes. And during those 5 minutes you did not enter the eastern corridor?" "No. The conversation took place in the main corridor, near the salon entrance. I never went further." Poirot nodded. He looked at Fenn for a long moment, with the expression Hastings privately called the weighing look. The one that meant Poirot was assessing not what a person was saying, but what their body was doing while they said it. Fenn bore the scrutiny with reasonable composure. His hands, folded in his lap, did not move. His breathing was even. Only the left hand, Poirot noticed, pressed very slightly harder against the right than was entirely natural. "One more question, Doctor," Poirot said. "The cardiac condition you mentioned, was it, in your medical opinion, genuinely life-threatening? In the near term, I mean." Fenn's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly behind his smudged spectacles. "It was a condition that required management. With proper care, Victor could have lived another 20 years. And without proper care, without it," Fenn stopped, recalibrated, "the risk would have been substantially higher." "I see," said Poirot. "Thank you, Doctor. That is most helpful. You may wait in the salon. I may have further questions later." When Fenn had gone, Hastings leaned forward immediately. "Well, what do you make of him?" "He is concealing something," Poirot said. "But then, I suspect they all are. The question is not who is hiding something. In a group of people connected to a murdered millionaire, everyone is hiding something. The question is, who is hiding the right something? He made a small note on his paper. Next, Miss Leland, if you please. Miss Iris Leland came in the way. She apparently did everything efficiently. She sat down, placed her evening bag on the desk in front of her with a precise click, and folded her hands. She was perhaps 45, with dark hair pulled back in a style that was elegant without being fashionable, and the kind of face that had been handsome rather than beautiful in youth and had settled with age into something considerably more interesting. Her eyes were grey and very direct. She did not wait for Poirot to begin. "I imagine you wish to know where I was between 11:56 and midnight," she said. "I was in the main salon near the east wall. I spoke briefly with one of the waiters at approximately 11:58. He can confirm this. Before that, I was making notes. The head of security passed me at his usual time, 11:50. He will also confirm." "You are very precise about the times," Poirot observed. "I am precise about everything, Monsieur Poirot. It is my professional function." 12 years with Mr. Hargrove, I understand. 12 years and 4 months. A long time. Yes, in 12 years and 4 months, one learns a great deal about a man. Miss Leland's expression did not change. One learns his habits, his preferences, his schedule, and his requirements. That is what a private secretary is paid to learn. And his enemies? A fractional pause. Mr. Hargrove was a man of considerable business success. Such men accumulate opposition as naturally as they accumulate money. I was aware of various disputes and difficulties, yes. It was sometimes my function to manage correspondence relating to them. Philippe Renard, for instance, among others. What was the nature of the dispute with Renard? Miss Leland considered this with the air of someone deciding precisely how much information it is appropriate to release. A shipping contract. Mr. Hargrove had agreed in principle to a partnership arrangement with Renard's company 3 years ago. He subsequently withdrew. There was a significant financial loss on Renard's side. The matter had been in correspondence for some time. Was it resolved? Not to Renard's satisfaction. "I see." Poirot looked at her steadily. "Miss Leland, did Mr. Hargrove tell you why he wished to use the private card room this evening?" Something moved behind Miss Leland's grey eyes. Very briefly. "No, he did not ask you to arrange a meeting." "No." "That is interesting," Poirot said mildly. "Because in 12 years and 4 months, I imagine most of Mr. Hargrove's meetings passed through you in some capacity." "Most," Miss Leland said. "Not all." The two words sat between them with a weight somewhat disproportionate to their size. "Thank you, Miss Leland," Poirot said pleasantly. "You have been most helpful." She took her evening bag from the desk, stood, and left with the same composed efficiency with which she had entered. "Yeah, at the door," she paused, just for a moment, and then continued without turning back. Hastings stared at the closed door. "She knows something." "She knows a great deal," Poirot agreed. "The question, as I said, is whether it is the right something." He paused. "Did you notice, Hastings, that she answered every question I asked her, and none of the questions I did not ask?" Hastings frowned. "What questions didn't you ask?" "Precisely," said Poirot. Philippe Renard came in smelling of cognac and suppressed anger. He was a compact man, perhaps 55, with the kind of dark good looks that had probably been striking 20 years ago, and were now merely handsome, in a worn, complicated way. He sat down heavily and looked at Poirot with the expression of a man who considers himself wronged by the universe in general, and is prepared to extend this grievance to whoever happens to be present. "This is an outrage," he said in French, and then repeated it in English for clarity. "I am detained here like a criminal. I have done nothing." "No one has suggested you have," Poirot said in French, which appeared to surprise Renard slightly. "I simply wish to speak with you. You were acquainted with Mr. Hargrove?" "I was in business with Mr. Hargrove," Renard said, with the particular emphasis of a man distinguishing between two very different things. 3 years ago, he destroyed that business. He made a promise, A formal promise, monsieur, with documents, and then he walked away. Because it suited him. Because something better had presented itself, and Victor Hargrove took always whatever suited Victor Hargrove, regardless of what it cost others. That must have produced considerable anger. Considerable anger, Renard almost laughed. Yes, you might say that. You came to Monte Carlo knowing he would be here. I came to Monte Carlo because I received information that he would be here. Yes, I wished to speak with him. Directly, face to face, without lawyers and without letters. I wished him to look at me and acknowledge what he had done. Did you speak with him this evening? Renard's jaw tightened. I did not. He saw me, I know he saw me, and he looked through me as though I were a window. Victor Hargrove was very accomplished at looking through people. And so you remained at the bar. I remained at the bar, drinking, oh yes, I will not pretend otherwise, and talking with the barman, who was a decent enough fellow and had no particular choice in the matter. From 11:30 until midnight, from 10 o'clock until the screaming began. Ask him. Poirot asked one more question gently. Monsieur Renard, did you hate Victor Hargrove? Renard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with an honesty that seemed to cost him something, I hated what he represented, the certainty that money grants some men, the absolute conviction that consequences apply to other people. Yes, I hated that, he looked at Poirot, but I did not kill him. No, Poirot said thoughtfully, looking at the man across from him, I do not think you did. Which was, as Poirot would reflect later with some private embarrassment, his first significant mistake of the investigation. Geoffrey Marsh entered the office with the careful walk of a man maintaining an appearance of calm that is costing him considerable effort. He was perhaps 35, well built, with fair hair that was slightly damp at the temples despite the coolness of the casino. His face was almost the face of an uncomplicated, agreeable young man. The kind of face, Poirot thought, that had been very carefully constructed to appear uncomplicated and agreeable, which was a rather different thing altogether. Terrible business, Marsh said, settling into the chair. Absolutely terrible. Uncle Victor, I can't quite take it in, to be honest. It is always difficult, Poirot agreed sympathetically, particularly when the death is so sudden. Yes, exactly, Marsh nodded. One moment he was there, and then he stopped, shook his head. But you were close to your uncle? Very. He could be a difficult man. I won't pretend otherwise. Strong opinions, high standards. But family meant everything to him. He always said that. And his estate? Poirot asked, in the same gentle conversational tone. You are named in his will, I understand. Marsh's eyes moved, just slightly, to the left and back. He mentioned it, yes. I don't know the details. That's all in the hands of solicitors. Of course. You were at the roulette table this evening, I believe, from 11:30. That's right. Dreadful run of luck, actually. The croupier will tell you, I was there the whole time. Didn't move until I heard the commotion. There was a small dispute, I understand, over a chip, at approximately 11:58. Yes, a misunderstanding. The croupier miscounted. I pointed it out. He shrugged lightly. These things happen. They do, Poirot agreed. A most unfortunate evening for you all around. He paused, as if a thought had just occurred to him. Tell me, Mr. Marsh, did you know your uncle intended to use the private card room tonight? No idea. He didn't discuss his movements with me. And the dispute over the chip, it was resolved? The croupier acknowledged the error? Eventually, yes. Good. Poirot nodded pleasantly. One last thing, purely routine. Your financial situation at present. It is comfortable? The careful calm cracked. Just slightly. Just for a second. Like a hairline fracture in fine china. I beg your pardon. Forgive me. It is intrusive, I know. Think nothing of it. Poirot smiled. Thank you for your time, Mr. Marsh. When Marsh had gone, Hastings said immediately, He's hiding something about the money. Yes, Poirot said. And that chip dispute, deliberately making a scene at exactly the right moment? Possibly, genuinely a dispute. We cannot know yet. Poirot sat back and looked at his list of names. All 5 interviewed. All 5 with alibis that were, on the surface, solid, confirmed, independent. And yet, he stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, to no one in particular, "A perfect alibi is not an absence of guilt, Hastings. It is evidence of preparation. And preparation requires one thing above all others." "What's that?" Hastings asked. "Knowledge," Poirot said. "Someone knew that room would be used tonight. Someone knew the time. Someone knew the layout of this casino well enough to plan a route, a timing, an alibi." He paused. "Which means somewhere in what these 5 people have told us, buried under the perfectly arranged surface of their perfect alibis, there is a piece of the truth." He picked up his pen. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin taking it apart." The room of silent things. The private card room had been sealed by the Monte Carlo police with a length of red tape and a small printed notice that read, in both French and English, "Accès interdit, police investigation in progress." Yet at 9:15 the following morning, when the Mediterranean sun was already turning the promenade into a ribbon of white fire, Inspector Marceau himself unlocked the door and stepped aside with a courteous but slightly resigned gesture. "You have 30 minutes, Monsieur Poirot," he said. "The staff wish to clean the room by noon. The casino, you understand, does not like to remember its misfortunes for very long." Poirot inclined his head. 30 minutes will be more than sufficient, Inspector. The truth, when it is ready to be seen, and rarely requires more." Hastings followed him inside, notebook already open, pencil poised like a man who believed that writing things down would somehow make the invisible visible. The room was exactly as they had left it the night before, yet somehow smaller in daylight, the glamour of midnight replaced by the flat honesty of morning. The single lamp had been switched off. Instead, pale sunlight filtered through the closed and latched window, laying long rectangles across the green baize table. Victor Hargrove still sat in the same chair, though now a white sheet had been drawn over him with the careful modesty of the police. The handle of the knife still protruded, a dark accusation against white linen. Poirot did not approach the body at once. He stood just inside the doorway, exactly where he had stood the previous night, and let his eyes travel the room in slow, deliberate circles. The little grey cells he had often observed worked best when the body was still. "The window," he murmured. Hastings looked. "Still latched from the inside. No one could have climbed in or out." "Precisely. Therefore the murderer entered and left by the door. The same door Madame Hargrove used to discover her husband." Poirot moved forward at last, his patent leather shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. He paused beside the sideboard. 2 crystal decanters stood there. One was open, its stopper lying beside it like a small discarded crown. A single glass, half full of what appeared to be cognac, sat beside the open decanter. Another glass, untouched and perfectly clean, stood a little apart. 2 glasses, Poirot said softly. One used, one waiting. Hargrove came here to meet someone. He poured for himself. He did not pour for his guest, or the guest did not wish to drink. He bent closer, nostrils flaring delicately. "The cognac is of excellent quality. Very old, very expensive. The sort of thing a man offers when he wishes to speak of important matters, or when he wishes to appear generous before delivering bad news." Hastings scribbled furiously. "So the murderer refused the drink? Or never intended to take one? Which is interesting, mon ami. A man who refuses hospitality in such a room is either very angry or very careful." Poirot turned his attention to the knife. With Marceau's permission, he had already been told that no fingerprints had been found on the handle, wiped clean with something soft, perhaps a handkerchief. The blade itself was ordinary, like the kind sold in any good hardware shop in Nice or Marseille. But the handle, plain dark wood, slightly curved for grip, was not quite ordinary. Poirot lifted the edge of the sheet with 2 careful fingers and studied the knife where it entered the chest. "Observe the angle, Hastings. The blow came from slightly above and straight in. Not a wild thrust, not the work of a woman in panic or a man in rage. Someone stood in front of Hargrove, looked him in the eye, and drove the blade home with the calm precision of a surgeon, or a man who has practiced the motion many times in his mind. He straightened. The knife was brought into the casino. That much we already knew. But where did it come from before that? Poirot's eyes narrowed. I have asked the inspector to make discreet inquiries among the staff. A knife of this description was reported missing yesterday afternoon from the hotel where the Hargrove party is staying, the Hotel de Paris. A kitchen knife taken from a drawer in the service pantry. Someone who knew the layout of the hotel and who had access to the back stairs. Hastings whistled softly. One of the five, almost certainly. Poirot moved to the fourth chair, the one that had remained empty. He pulled it out and sat in it, exactly opposite the dead man, as though taking the place of the murderer for a moment. He rested his hands on the table, palms down, and stared at the sheet-covered figure. Tell me, Hastings, what do you see? Hastings blinked. A dead man. A knife. 2 glasses. A closed window. Poirot smiled, small and sad. You see the obvious. I see the fourth chair. It has been moved, mon ami, slightly, and the other 3 chairs are pushed in neatly beneath the table. This one was drawn out, sat upon, and then pushed back, but not quite far enough. Someone sat here, facing Hargrove, for at least 2 or 3 minutes before the blow was struck. They talked. Perhaps they argued, and then he made the small precise stabbing motion with his right hand. He rose. Now come, look at the carpet. The carpet was deep, expensive, the colour of old claret. In the soft morning light, Poirot pointed to a faint indentation near the fourth chair. 2 small parallel marks, as though the heels of someone's shoes had pressed down hard and then shifted. Someone stood up quickly. Someone who was tense. Someone who wanted to be gone before the scream could bring the entire casino running. Poirot's voice dropped. 4 minutes, Hastings. In 4 minutes a man can rise, strike, wipe the handle, replace the chair, walk back down the corridor, and rejoin the crowd as though he had never left the roulette wheel, or the bar, or the watchful eye of a waiter. He turned toward the door. The room remembers, mon ami. It remembers the weight of the person who sat here. It remembers the refusal of the second glass. And it will remember, I think, the exact moment when the perfect alibi began to crack. Outside in the corridor, Inspector Marceau was waiting, arms folded, moustache twitching with the impatience of a man who had already drunk 2 cups of strong coffee and still felt no clearer. Anything? He asked. Poirot adjusted his boutonniere with the care of a man who had all the time in the world. A great deal, Inspector. The murderer did not merely kill Victor Hargrove. A he or she sat opposite him and spoke with him first. They drank nothing together. They shared only one thing. Marceau raised an eyebrow. And what was that? The knowledge, Poirot said softly, that one of them would not leave the room alive. He glanced back at the closed door of the private card room, where the fourth chair still stood a fraction of an inch too far from the table. Tomorrow, he added, almost to himself, we shall have the second conversation with our 5 friends. This time, I think, the questions will be rather more uncomfortable. Hastings closed his notebook with a snap. The little grey cells were humming now, quietly, steadily, like a well-tuned engine preparing for a long journey. The glittering cage of Monte Carlo had not yet given up all its secrets, but it would. By midnight tomorrow, Poirot was quite certain someone's perfect alibi would lie in pieces on the green baize table, as broken and final as the life of Victor Hargrove. The weight of the fourth chair. By 10 o'clock the following morning, the Casino de Monte Carlo had reopened its doors, but the main salon carried a different atmosphere. The chandeliers still blazed, the carpet still swallowed every footfall, yet the laughter at the tables sounded a fraction too bright, the clink of chips a fraction too loud. Death, Poirot reflected, has a way of making even the most expensive illusions feel suddenly fragile. He had chosen the same small office off the corridor. The list of 5 names still lay on the desk, but now, beneath each one, he had added 2 new lines in his precise hand: fourth chair and refused glass. Inspector Marceau had agreed, with only the slightest tightening of his moustache, to let Poirot conduct the second round of conversations alone. Unofficially, of course, the inspector had muttered. Poirot had smiled and said nothing. Unofficial or not, the little grey cells cared only for truth. Dr. Alistair Fenn was called first. He entered as before, tall, apologetic, spectacles slightly smudged, but this time his shoulders carried a new tension, as though the night's sleep had done nothing to lighten the weight he carried. He folded himself into the chair and waited. Poirot did not begin with pleasantries. He slid a small sketch across the desk, a quick diagram of the private card room drawn by Hastings under Poirot's direction. "Observe, Doctor, the fourth chair. It was moved. Someone sat opposite Monsieur Hargrove for several minutes before the knife entered his heart. They spoke. They sat face to face." Poirot's eyes were very steady. "You were his physician. You knew his habits better than most. Who, in your opinion, would Victor Hargrove have invited into that room for a private conversation at midnight?" Fenn's left hand tightened again on the right, exactly as it had the night before. "I cannot say with certainty. Cannot, or will not." Poirot leaned forward a fraction. The second glass on the sideboard remained untouched. Hargrove poured for himself. His guest refused. A man who refuses a drink offered by Victor Hargrove is either very angry or very careful not to leave evidence behind. Fingerprints, perhaps, or the smell of cognac on his breath when he returned to the salon. Fenn's mouth opened, closed. Then quietly, "Victor was agitated, as I told you. He may have wished to speak with someone about a business matter or a family matter." "Family," Poirot repeated softly. Or perhaps a medical matter. His heart condition, for example." The doctor's eyes flickered. "I have already explained. You explained that it required management, but you did not say whether it was genuine." Poirot's voice remained gentle, yet the words cut like the edge of the missing knife. A man with a weak heart might be more easily frightened, or more easily silenced. "Tell me, doctor, did Victor Hargrove truly have a cardiac condition that evening? Or was that another part of the performance?" Fenn sat very still. The silence stretched. At last he said, "I have taken an oath, Monsieur Poirot. I cannot discuss a patient's confidential medical details without the patient's permission," Poirot finished. "The patient is dead, doctor, and the oath does not cover murder." Fenn's shoulders sagged. There was no immediate danger to his heart that night. The condition was exaggerated for insurance purposes, for appearances. Victor liked people to think he was vulnerable in one small way. It made them underestimate him. Poirot nodded once, as though a small piece had clicked into place. "And you followed him toward the corridor, not because you feared for his heart, but because you feared for something else?" Fenn did not answer. He simply looked at the sketch of the fourth chair and said nothing more. Poirot dismissed him with a courteous nod. The door closed. Hastings whispered, "He's lying about something big." "He is protecting something bigger," Poirot corrected. "Next, if you please, Miss Leland." Miss Iris Leland entered with the same efficient click of her evening bag, but this morning the bag remained closed on her lap. Her grey eyes were sharper, more guarded. Poirot wasted no time. "The fourth chair, mademoiselle. Someone sat there and spoke with Monsieur Hargrove before killing him. You were his private secretary for 12 years and 4 months. You arranged almost all his meetings." "Almost." He let the word hang. "Did he ask you to arrange a meeting in the private card room last night?" Her answer came without hesitation. "No. Yet you closed your notebook and slipped it into your bag the exact moment he passed you on his way to the corridor." "I always do when my work is finished for the evening." Poirot smiled. "And was your work finished? Or had you just written something you did not wish anyone else to see?" For the first time a faint colour touched Miss Leland's cheeks. "I wrote nothing of importance." "2 glasses," Poirot continued smoothly. "Or 1 used, 1 untouched. Your employer offered his guest a drink. The guest refused. A woman who refuses a drink in such circumstances might do so because she does not wish her lipstick to remain on the rim, or because she already carries something far more dangerous in her handbag." Miss Leland's hands remained perfectly still. "I was never in that room, Monsieur Poirot." "Perhaps not. But you knew the knife was missing from the hotel pantry yesterday afternoon. The hotel staff have confirmed that the service pantry is near the back stairs used by the Hargrove party. You, as secretary, move freely through the hotel. You notice things. She met his gaze directly. So do you, it seems. Poirot inclined his head, acknowledging the small thrust. Indeed. And I notice that you have still not answered the question I did not ask yesterday. Miss Leland stood. If you have nothing further, I believe I shall return to the salon. When the door closed behind her, Hastings exhaled. She's as cool as they come. Cool, Poirot murmured, or very well rehearsed. Philippe Renard came next, still smelling faintly of yesterday's cognac. His dark eyes were bloodshot but defiant. Poirot placed the sketch before him. The fourth chair, monsieur. Someone sat and talked with Victor Hargrove before the knife. Someone who hated what he represented. Someone who had waited 3 years for the right moment. Renard's jaw worked. I was at the bar. The barman will swear to it. The barman is not a clock, monsieur, and 4 minutes is a very short time to walk from the bar, down the corridor, sit, argue, you strike, wipe the handle and return. Yet it can be done if one moves quickly and if one has practiced the route in one's mind many times. Renard leaned forward suddenly, voice low and fierce. I wanted him to look at me. I wanted him to acknowledge what he had done. But I did not sit opposite him with a knife in my pocket. I am not that kind of man. Poirot studied him. No, he said at last. Perhaps you're not, but you are the kind of man who would watch someone else do it and say nothing. Renard's face darkened, but he offered no reply. Geoffrey Marsh entered with the same carefully constructed calm. This time, the calm lasted less than 30 seconds. The fourth chair, Mr. Marsh, Poirot said without preamble. Someone sat facing your uncle, someone who knew he was about to change his will, or perhaps had already done so. He has the estate, the shipping interests, the £4 million. These things make a nephew very attentive. Marsh's fair hair was damp again at the temples. I was at the roulette table. Witnesses saw you make a small scene over a chip at 11:58, a most convenient distraction. Poirot's voice remained soft. The knife came from the hotel pantry. You, as family, walk those back corridors without question. You knew your uncle's habit of offering cognac before delivering unpleasant news. You knew he would pour for himself first. I loved my uncle, Marsh said, but the words sounded rehearsed, even to his own ears. Poirot smiled sadly. Love, in families such as yours, is often measured in pounds and pence. Tell me, when you sat at the roulette table, were you truly losing money, or merely appearing to lose it, so that no one would notice when you slipped away for 4 short minutes? Marsh's hands clenched on the arms of the chair. This is outrageous. Murder, Poirot replied, is always outrageous. He let the young man go without pressing further. The crack was there now. It needed only time to widen. Finally, Celestine Hargrove. She entered in black silk, the colour of fresh morning, yet her beauty remained untouched, almost defiant. She sat without waiting for invitation and looked Poirot straight in the eye. The fourth chair, he began. I know, she said quietly. You think I sat there. You think I refused the glass because my lipstick would have betrayed me. You think I killed my husband in the 2 minutes between leaving the table and the scream. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Or you have been thinking as well, madame. I have had all night to think. Her voice was low, husky, the voice of the singer she had once been. Victor was not an easy man to love, Monsieur Poirot, but he was mine, and someone took him from me in that room while I was 20 feet away in the corridor. If I had known he was meeting someone, I would have stopped it, but I did not know. Yet you rose from your table at 11:58 and walked toward the eastern corridor. I received a note. She reached into her evening bag and placed a small folded paper on the desk. It was slipped to me by a waiter. It said Victor wished to see me privately at midnight. When I reached the door and found him like that, I could not scream at once. The shock was too great. Poirot unfolded the note. The handwriting was neat, anonymous, written in block capitals. Victor requests your presence in the private card room at midnight. Come alone. Urgent. He studied it for a long moment. This is not your husband's hand. No. Someone else wrote it. Someone who wanted you in that corridor at exactly the right moment. Someone who needed a witness. Or a suspect. Celestine Hargrove's empty eyes from the night before were no longer empty. They burned now with something cold and dangerous. Whoever wrote that note, she said, killed my husband, and if you do not find them, Monsieur Poirot, I will. Poirot folded the note carefully and placed it in his pocket. When the door had closed behind her, Hastings let out a long breath. 5 conversations, 5 more cracks. But which one is the real one? Poirot stared at the empty chairs around the desk as though the suspects were still sitting there. All of them are real in some way, mon ami, but one of them is the 4th chair. One of them refused the glass. One of them carried the knife from the hotel pantry and returned to the salon with a smile on their face. He tapped the list once. Tomorrow night, he said, we shall gather them all together in this same salon. And then, Hastings, the little grey cells will speak. Outside, the Mediterranean sun climbed higher, turning the sea into a mirror once more. But this mirror no longer reflected only light and diamonds. It reflected 5 perfect alibis, and 1 perfect lie that was about to shatter. The note that lied. The afternoon light in Monte Carlo had turned treacherous by 3 o'clock. It slanted through the tall windows of the casino's private office, like a blade of its own, picking out dust motes and the faint lines of strain on every face. The chandeliers were unlit now, the roulette wheels silent. The salon closed to the public until evening. Only the 5 suspects remained, scattered at separate tables like pieces on a chessboard. No one had yet dared to move. Poirot sat once more behind the assistant manager's desk, the small folded note from Celestine Hargrove lying open before him. Beside it lay a second sheet, photographic paper, still damp at the edges, showing an enlarged sample of the block capitals. Inspector Marceau had delivered it personally, his moustache bristling with the quiet triumph of a man who had found something useful at last. The hotel stationery, Marceau said, taken from the writing desk in the Hargrove suite itself. The ink matches the pen in Miss Leland's possession, her personal one, the one she keeps in her evening bag. The waiter who delivered the note to Madame Hargrove has been found. He swears it was handed to him by a man in evening dress whose face he did not see clearly. Tall, broad shoulders, the description fits Geoffrey Marsh, or Dr. Fenn, or even Renard if he had removed his jacket. Poirot studied the 2 sheets in silence. Hastings stood at his shoulder, notebook open but forgotten. A clever touch, Poirot murmured at last. The note was written in the victim's own suite, on his own paper, with his secretary's pen. It was delivered at the precise moment required, and it drew Madame Hargrove into the corridor at exactly the right second to discover the body, or to be discovered there herself. He looked up at the inspector. The waiter is certain of the timing? 11:57, Marceau confirmed. He remembers because the clock in the corridor struck the 3/4 hour as he passed Madame Hargrove the note. Poirot's eyes moved to the list of 5 names. Beneath each one, the words 4th chair and refused glass had been joined by a 3rd line, the note. Someone, he said softly, is very fond of perfect timing. He asked for the suspects to be brought in once more, but not together, one by one, as before. This time, however, he did not show them the photograph. He simply placed the original note on the desk and watched their faces. Geoffrey Marsh was first. The young man's carefully constructed calm had begun to fray at the edges. A small muscle jumped at the corner of his jaw when he saw the paper. "You recognize this, Mr. Marsh?" Marsh's eyes flicked left. "No, should I?" "It was slipped to your aunt at 11:57. It brought her to the corridor at the exact moment the scream was heard. Someone wanted a witness. Someone wanted her there, perhaps to take the blame." "I was at the roulette table," Marsh said, but the words came too quickly. "You already know that." "Indeed, and yet the waiter who delivered this note described a man of your height and build." Poirot let the silence stretch. "The note was written in your uncle's suite, with Miss Leland's pen. You have access to both." Marsh's hands clenched. I didn't write it. I didn't deliver it. I was losing money at the table. Ask anyone." Poirot smiled, small and sad. Losing money in public is a very useful way to be remembered, is it not? He dismissed the nephew without pressing further. The crack had widened. Miss Leland came next. She looked at the note as though it were a business letter that had arrived unsigned. "My pen," she said at once. "I keep it in my bag. It was there all evening, until I noticed it missing at 11:45. I assumed I had dropped it. I searched for 10 minutes near the east wall. That is why the head of security saw me there." Poirot's eyebrows rose a fraction. "You did not mention this missing pen yesterday? You did not ask? Ah, and the hotel stationery from your employer's suite, also missing?" A faint colour touched her cheeks again. "Mr. Hargrove kept a supply in his sitting room. Anyone in the party could have taken a sheet." "Anyone," Poirot repeated, "including you. I was in the salon the entire time. 4 witnesses confirmed it." "4 witnesses," Poirot said gently, "who were watching a woman standing near the east wall making notes. A woman who closed her notebook the moment her employer passed. A woman who then spent 10 minutes searching for a missing pen at the exact time when a note was being written and delivered." Miss Leland met his gaze without flinching. "I did not kill him, Monsieur Poirot." "Perhaps not," he replied, "but you're protecting someone who did." She left without another word. Dr. Fenn followed. He stared at the note for a long moment, then pushed his spectacles higher on his nose with a trembling finger. "The handwriting is block capitals. Anyone could have written it. Even a child could imitate it." "Even a doctor," Poirot said, who was delayed in the outer corridor speaking of first aid arrangements at the very moment this note was being delivered. Fenn's voice dropped. "I have told you everything I know about Victor's heart." "Have you?" Poirot leaned forward. "Or have you told me only what you wished me to believe? The 4th chair, Doctor. The refused glass. The note that brought his wife to the door. These things speak of preparation, medical precision, a man who knows exactly where to strike, so that death is quick and blood is minimal." Fenn stood up abruptly. "I am a physician, not a murderer." "Many murderers," Poirot said softly, "have been both." Philippe Renard was brief and bitter. He barely glanced at the note. "I was at the bar. I hated the man, yes. But I do not write little notes like a schoolboy. I say what I mean to a man's face." "And yet," Poirot observed, "someone used your grievance, your very public anger, as cover. Someone who knew you would remain at the bar, drinking and talking loudly enough to be remembered." Renard's laugh was short and ugly. "Then they were cleverer than I am." Celestine Hargrove was last. She read the note again, her fingers tracing the block letters, as though she could feel the hand that had written them. "I believed it came from Victor," she whispered. "I went because he asked for me, and I found him. Like that." Her voice hardened. "Whoever wrote this knew I would come. They used me, Monsieur Poirot. They used my love for him as the final piece of their perfect alibi." Poirot watched her carefully, and the empty eyes of the first night had filled with something colder than grief. "Madame," he said, "the note was written on your husband's own paper, with his secretary's pen, delivered by a man of a certain height and build. It was not written by your husband. It was written by the person who sat in the 4th chair." He paused, letting the words settle. "And that person," he continued, "made one small mistake. They assumed that no one would examine the timing of the note itself. They assumed the 5th minute, the minute between the note being written and the knife falling, would remain invisible." When all 5 had gone, Poirot remained seated. The office was quiet except for the distant murmur of the Mediterranean beyond the promenade. Hastings cleared his throat. "The note changes everything. It proves someone planned the exact moment Madame Hargrove would arrive. It proves more than that, mon ami." Poirot tapped the photograph lightly. "It proves the murderer had an accomplice, or that one of our 5 is playing a far deeper game than we imagined. The knife from the pantry, the note from the suite, the pen from the bag, these things required access and knowledge. But the refusal of the glass, that was personal. That was hatred wearing a smile." He rose slowly, straightening his jacket with the automatic precision that meant a decision had been reached. "Tonight," he said, "at midnight exactly. We will gather them all in the main salon, under the same chandeliers, at the same tables where they sat while Victor Hargrove died. I will lay every piece before them: the fourth chair, the refused glass, the note that lied, the knife that was missing, the heart that was never in danger." Poirot's eyes glittered with the cold fire of the little grey cells fully awake. "And then, Hastings, one of them will make the final mistake, because perfect alibis are like perfect mirrors. When the light changes, the crack becomes impossible to hide." Outside, the Mediterranean lay flat and dark once more, catching the first evening lights, like a mirror grown tired of honest reflections. But tonight, the mirror would reflect something else entirely. Tonight, it would reflect the face of a murderer who believed their crime was flawless. By the time the clock struck 12, Poirot intended to prove them wrong. The midnight reckoning, the clock above the entrance to the Casino de Monte Carlo, struck midnight for the second time in 2 nights. The main salon was no longer a glittering playground. The roulette wheel stood silent, the baccarat tables empty of cards, the chandeliers burning low and golden, as though the very lights themselves understood the gravity of the occasion. 5 people sat at a single long table placed in the centre of the room, exactly where Victor Hargrove had played his last game of chemin de fer. Behind them, at a respectful distance, stood Inspector Marceau and 2 uniformed officers. Hastings hovered near the wall, notebook open but untouched. And in front of them all, small, neat, and perfectly composed in his evening dress, stood Hercule Poirot. The Mediterranean beyond the windows lay black and still, in reflecting the casino's lights, like a mirror that had finally grown honest. Poirot looked at each face in turn: Celestine Hargrove, in her black silk; Geoffrey Marsh with his fair hair now dry but his eyes wary; Dr. Alistair Fenn, tall and apologetic, behind his spectacles; Miss Iris Leland, with her evening bag closed tightly on the table before her; Philippe Renard, hunched forward, with the remains of his anger. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice quiet yet carrying to every corner of the great salon. "We have come full circle. 2 nights ago, at this very hour, a man was murdered in a room 20 feet from where we now sit. He was stabbed with a knife brought from the Hôtel de Paris pantry. He was killed in 4 minutes, and every one of you possessed what appeared to be a perfect alibi." He paused, letting the words settle like a stone in still water. "But perfect, as my old friend Monsieur Poirot has often observed, is the first sign that something is very, very wrong." He moved to the table and placed upon it 5 objects in a neat row: the sketch of the card room, the folded note, a photograph of the block capitals, a small plain kitchen knife in a clear evidence bag, and a single crystal glass. "Let us begin with the room itself," he said. "The 4th chair. It had been drawn out, sat upon, and pushed back imperfectly. Someone sat opposite Victor Hargrove and spoke with him. Someone he trusted enough to meet privately at midnight. Someone to whom he offered cognac from the open decanter. Yet the second glass remained untouched. Why?" Poirot's eyes moved to the suspects. "Because the murderer was careful. The murderer did not wish to leave fingerprints or saliva or the scent of alcohol that might be noticed when he or she returned to the salon. That refusal of hospitality was the first crack in the perfect alibi." He touched the knife. "This was taken from the hotel pantry on the afternoon of the murder. Only someone with easy access to the back stairs and the Hargrove suite could have done so without question. Someone who moved through the hotel as though it were their own home." His hand moved to the note. "This was written on hotel stationery, taken from Monsieur Hargrove's sitting room. It was written with Miss Leland's personal pen, the pen she suddenly lost at 11:45 while standing near the east wall, as it was delivered to Madame Hargrove at exactly 11:57 by a waiter who described a man of broad shoulders and certain height. The note was a lie. It was never from Victor Hargrove. It was written to bring Madame Hargrove into the corridor at the precise second the scream would be heard. so that she would be found standing over the body, or so that suspicion would fall neatly upon her. Celestine Hargrove's eyes flashed, but she remained silent. Poirot's voice grew softer, yet sharper. Now we come to the alibis, the beautiful, flawless alibis that were arranged like a stage set. He turned first to Dr. Fenn. You, Doctor, were delayed in the outer corridor, speaking of first aid arrangements. A convenient conversation. But you followed Monsieur Hargrove because you knew something was wrong. Something about the heart condition you'd helped exaggerate for years. You protected your patient's secrets, even after his death, but you did not kill him. Fenn exhaled, shoulders sagging in relief. Poirot moved on. Monsieur Renard, you remained at the bar, loud and angry, exactly as someone expected you to be. Your very public hatred made you the perfect distraction. But you did not leave the bar. You did not kill him. Renard gave a short, bitter nod. Miss Leland, you were near the east wall making notes, then searching for your missing pen. 4 witnesses saw you. Yet the pen was used to write the note that lured Madame Hargrove. You knew every habit, every schedule, every secret of your employer, but you did not sit in the 4th chair. You did not strike the blow. Miss Leland's grey eyes remained steady, though her hands tightened on the evening bag. Poirot turned to Celestine Hargrove. Madame, you rose at 11:58 and walked to the corridor because of the note. You found your husband dead. You stood frozen for perhaps 90 seconds before you screamed. 2 minutes, the police said. But those 2 minutes were not enough to commit the murder, wipe the knife, replace the chair, and return. You were used, madame, cruelly used, but you did not kill your husband. Celestine's lips trembled once, then stilled. And finally, Poirot looked at Geoffrey Marsh. The young man's face was pale. A small muscle jumped at the corner of his jaw, the same one Poirot had noticed the night before. Mr. Marsh, Poirot said almost gently, you were at the roulette table from 11:30. You had a small public dispute with the croupier at exactly 11:58 over a disputed chip. 3 witnesses remembered you clearly. A perfect alibi, unless one realizes that the dispute was staged, that the croupier had been quietly promised a generous tip if he made a small scene at the right moment, that while everyone's eyes were on the argument, you slipped away for 4 minutes. 4 minutes to walk the corridor, sit in the 4th chair, refuse the offered glass because you could not risk leaving any trace, argue with your uncle about the new will he intended to sign the next morning, rise quickly, drive the knife home with the precision your doctor uncle had once described to you in passing, wipe the handle, push the chair back, and return to the table before the scream brought everyone running. Marsh opened his mouth. No sound came. Poirot continued, relentless yet sorrowful. You knew the knife was in the pantry. You knew the layout. You took Miss Leland's pen earlier in the evening while she was occupied. You wrote the note in your uncle's suite. You delivered it yourself, disguised only by the dim light and the waiter's haste. You needed your aunt in the corridor so that suspicion would fall on her, or at least divide it neatly. And all the while, you played the part of the affectionate nephew who was merely losing money at roulette. Geoffrey Marsh rose halfway from his chair, then sank back down. His carefully constructed face had cracked completely. He was going to cut me out, he whispered. The new will. He told me in the room. Said I was weak. I said I disappointed him for the last time. Poirot nodded once. And so you killed him before the will could be changed. A crime built on alibis. A crime designed to be unsolvable. But the little grey cells, mon ami, do not believe in perfection. Inspector Marceau stepped forward. The 2 officers moved with him. Geoffrey Marsh did not resist. He simply looked at Poirot with something that might have been hatred, or might have been admiration. You knew, he said hoarsely, from the beginning. I suspected, Poirot corrected. The 4th chair told me the rest. The officers led the nephew away. The salon fell silent, except for the distant murmur of the sea. Celestine Hargrove rose slowly. She looked at Poirot for a long moment, then inclined her head. Not in thanks exactly, but in recognition of something deeper. Miss Leland closed her evening bag with a soft click. Dr. Fenn removed his spectacles and polished them with shaking hands. Philippe Renard simply stared at the empty chair where Marsh had sat. Poirot turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami," he said quietly. "The case is finished. The glittering cage has given up its secret." They walked together toward the entrance. Behind them, the chandeliers still burned. The carpet still swallowed sound. The Mediterranean still reflected the lights like a mirror grown tired of lies. But tonight the mirror showed only truth, and in the quiet of the Monte Carlo night, Hercule Poirot allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "Perfect alibis," he murmured, almost to himself, "are very rarely perfect. And now, Hastings, perhaps we may finally enjoy the remainder of our holiday." The casino never sleeps. But on this particular night, at least one fortune had been lost forever, and the little grey cells rested at last.